Welcome to Economy Made Simple. I am Shamubeel Eaqub, the Chief Economist at Simplicity. There's a lot going on in the world right now, and I'm here to make sense of it. Simple, no-nonsense discussions that keep you in the know about what's going on in the economy, job market, politics, and financial markets. Welcome to the first episode of Economy Made Simple. In this episode, I'll talk a little bit about the uncertainty in global financial markets, why it matters, and what's also going on in New Zealand, because there's quite a lot to unpack. Over recent weeks, financial markets have fallen hard. You might have seen in the news that stock prices are falling, there is uncertainty, and there is fear. And you might have also noticed that in your KiwiSaver balances when you logged in. And why this is happening is there is a big increase in uncertainty around the world. It's economic, it's political, and it's just new stuff that we're not used to. In the US, we're seeing announcements of tariffs. Tariffs are like taxes on US consumers. What it does do is it creates higher prices for US consumers, but it also disrupts the flow of goods and services, something that the world hasn't really been used to over the course of the last 80 years. With these very old school policies coming back in force, we are seeing a lot of uncertainty around how economies will be affected, and financial markets are reflecting that uncertainty. Now, when you see a world that's frightening, when you see a world where things are volatile and financial markets are falling, it can feel very frightening from a financial KiwiSaver perspective. But I think a little bit of context is important. And the context is this. KiwiSaver is your retirement savings. It's something that you'll use a long time into the future. And as the old adage goes, retirement savings is all about time in the market rather than timing the market. So if you save consistently and regularly over time, you'll come out better off. Because as history has shown, we have more good years than bad years. So it's not personal advice, but it's really important to know that when it comes to saving for retirement, it's about being in good habit of saving regularly for the long term. The tariffs that are being touted at the moment are quite unprecedented. We are looking at kinds of interventions that we haven't seen since the 1930s. And because it's been such a long time between times when we've seen policies like this, there is just no rule book. There is no way for us to make sense of it accurately. And that's what's creating so much fear. The other reason why people have been caught a bit surprised is because last time, when Trump was in power, his tariffs were much smaller and they caused very little disruption to the global economy. But this time around, the tariffs are bigger and they're likely to be more disruptive. But we don't know for sure because these tariff announcements are changing almost on a daily basis. So the world feels very different. And the first thing that's really changed is around geopolitics. And what I mean by that is how the world kind of interacts with each other. The rules of the games that were established after the Second World War, which is kind of described as the rise of the Western Alliance led by the US, really kind of set how countries would deal with each other, what borders meant, and how we would kind of deal with each other when there was a conflict. But those things are really being undone. And what that means is we're probably going to see a lot more conflict. We're going to see a lot more growing defense and growing borrowing by governments around the world. And also means that we're probably going to find it harder to get on with each other. So the world does feel a lot less certain and a lot more fearful than we have in over 80 years. The reason why we're seeing this is because politics is reflecting rifts in society. Over the course of the last century, we've seen big improvements around the world. Inequality between countries has fallen. Many countries have been lifted out of poverty. But what we have also seen, particularly in the last 30 to 40 years, is growing inequality within countries. And that is what's spilling over to this real frightful, fearful, angry politics that we're seeing around the world. Whether it's Brexit in the UK, the rise of the far right across many parts of Europe, or the re-election of Trump. These are all reflections of society that's finding it difficult to grapple with the current social and economic reality. We should not assume that those pain points will disappear soon. We should assume that politics will become volatile, that we will see policies that are being pursued by these governments will be unorthodox, different, new, experimental. And we're also probably going to see that these policies and ways of doing things are not going to last a long time. We're probably going to see rapid changes in governments, rapid changes in policies, and that creates an unstable, unpredictable background for businesses and for people. And that is the biggest risk that we see in terms of financial markets and economies. For New Zealand, I think there are two big immediate risks. The first is, of course, we are reliant on a global economy for our exports, for our tourism, and those can become affected if our trading partners like China and America are being affected by these uncertainties. The other thing that affects us quite a lot is we are very reliant on global shipping. When there is less certainty, less security in maritime routes, in seas around the world, we can see the cost of shipping going up, and it can make it harder for New Zealand to trade with the world. New Zealand is not alone in this. All trading countries are experiencing the same difficulties, but because we're so small and so far away, it has a bigger effect on us. An unsettled global environment is of course important for New Zealand because we trade so much with the world. But there is also some reasons why we should be optimistic that we are a little bit more protected than many other countries. And one part of that is we are in fact a very large country in the middle of nowhere. For once, our distance from the world and our small population is in fact a good thing. It means that we don't have lots of countries that are on a border. It means that we don't have the same tensions that are affecting Europe. If you draw a 2,000 kilometer radius around Berlin, it's all of Europe, including Russia. If you draw a 2,000 kilometer radius around Wellington, there are no big navies. There's nobody. It's only our Pacific neighbors. As a result, I think we should be optimistic that New Zealand is somewhat protected from some of the big issues and big uncertainties that we're seeing around the world. Because New Zealand trades with the world, we are exposed to these global movements. But New Zealand is more diversified today than we have ever been in our history. Whether we look at it in terms of what we export, in terms of commodities, or who we trade with, in terms of countries that we trade with, both of those things have become more diversified over time. It doesn't mean that we don't have risks. Our biggest trading partners are China and the US. Both of those countries are going through their own issues right now. Our biggest exports are dairy, meat, and forestry, and those are commodity products that can move around a lot based on what's happening in global markets. So it's not that we are immune, but the fact that we have grown our exports to many other countries, the fact that we're exporting many other commodities and many other services means that New Zealand is more diversified today than at any other point in time in our history. That gives us a form of protection. The last year has been very tough on many people and many businesses. That's what a recession is, when people are spending less, investing less, and doing less. But we're at the bottom of the recession. Latest data shows that the economy is just beginning to grow, but it is after a period of pretty tough times. The outlook for the next 12 months is much more positive. We should see lower interest rates, making it easier for people with big mortgages. We should see businesses and households starting to invest more. That should really start to pick things up by the middle of this year. This recession has been very unusual. In a typical recession, we tend to see lots of job losses and people doing it really tough in their homes. This time around, we've seen a much bigger impact on businesses. Business profits have been hit hard, and more businesses have closed than we have experienced in quite a long time. This has been more of a business and profits recession rather than a people and households recession. It's not to minimize that people have been affected. It's just that this time around, the number of people who are unemployed is a lot less than in previous cycles. It means that when the recovery comes, we'll be starting the recovery on a stronger position than every other economic cycle that I have experienced as an economist. We know that the global environment is uncertain, and that remains a risk. But the optimism that I have for New Zealand this year is from our domestic economy starting to recover. And the domestic economy is really about people spending more, so going to the supermarket, going to the shops, doing more things, like going on holidays. Household spending, when that picks up, which is about 2/3 of the economy, will really start to lift the overall economy. The other part of the domestic economy is investments, whether it's building houses or investments by businesses. Those things, I believe, will start to pick up because interest rates are getting cheaper. And we just need to, because there's been 2 to 3 years where businesses and households have just been so careful that they have not done enough. There's a lot of catching up to be done. With interest rates falling, banks starting to lend again, it's very likely that we will see investments by households and businesses really starting to pick up by the second half of this year. The most encouraging thing that we have seen in the last 6 months is a return of hope. After a couple of years where everything looked really negative, we're starting to see both households and businesses telling us they're more hopeful about the next 12 months. They're hopeful that things will get better. They're hopeful there'll be more customers. They're hopeful that their financial situation will improve. But hope is not enough on its own. What we also need to see is hope is matched by reality, that hope is matched by action. What we see during recessions, and especially late-stage recessions, is businesses and households are feeling hope, but they're still too scared to act. Once we start to see businesses starting to advertise for more jobs, when we start to see households starting to just spend a little bit more money, that's the evidence that hope is crystallizing into the real economy. And we're just starting to see the beginnings of that. And that's why I think as we build this momentum, as this hope turns into reality, we will see this economic recovery build momentum over the course of coming months. There are two big drivers why I think that hope will turn into reality. The first is the cost of living crisis that really buffeted people around over the course of the last couple of years has really slowed. Cost of living is not rising as much, incomes are picking up, interest rates are coming down, so people have more money in their bank accounts, and we are going to see that flowing through. And we're seeing interest rates fall even further. The Reserve Bank has already cut interest rates, we've seen mortgage rates come down, and we've got probably a few more months of interest rates coming down a bit more. Those two things, the relief on the cost of living and the impetus of falling interest rates, are powerful drivers of the economy. Every other economic recovery we have seen in the past has been catalyzed by much lower interest rates that encourage people to invest and spend. Like I said, there are still some headwinds. Yes, I'm feeling more optimistic about the domestic situation in New Zealand, but I see some headwinds. And those headwinds are first from the global situation that is very hard for us to control. But there are also two domestic risks that are there. The first is net migration is slowing. Because we're a small country and a small population, swings in net migration can create massive changes in demand for housing, for goods and services, which is what the economy is. And net migration, unfortunately, has been slowing very sharply over the course of the last 12 months. And that's been because more New Zealanders, particularly young New Zealanders, are leaving for Australia. And we've got fewer people coming to New Zealand because we've tightened up our visa criteria. That is going to act as a bit of a dampener on the economic cycle. The second source of risk is fiscal austerity. The current government came to power promising to spend less, and they're absolutely trying to do that. As a result, a big chunk of the economy, which is government spending, is going to be adding some headwinds. The slowdown in government spending over the course of the last 12 months has been very much about a reduction in investment spending, particularly in infrastructure, which is really disappointing because we know that New Zealand has a big infrastructure deficit, and during a recession is when you really want governments to ramp up their investment in infrastructure, because as a result, you still get the kit that you want, you get it cheaper, you get it on time, and you keep all those people who might have otherwise been fired. One emerging risk for New Zealand is political risk. Like we're seeing in the US, it could be something that comes here too. And what I mean by that is in the US, we're seeing rapid changes in government, and we might see the same in New Zealand. Political polling suggests that this government is already unpopular amongst the voting public. It's very unusual in New Zealand to see this level of closeness halfway into the first term of government. When there are rapid changes in government, we tend to see rapid changes in policies, and as a result, we tend to see rapid changes in the economic and political context. And that flows on to us as individuals, as businesses, and as savers and investors. So we've talked a lot about the global situation and the local situation and markets, and I think there's some big themes that we should think about for the coming year. The first is that uncertainty is here to stay. Whether it's around geopolitics or in New Zealand, I think we should assume that the next 80 years or the next 50 years, we are going to experience just more uncertainty. That means we should be humble and curious to understand the world around us. When it comes to our KiwiSaver, it's really about keeping it in context. If it's for your retirement, make sure you treat it as your retirement savings. Retirement is all about time in the market rather than timing the market. In New Zealand, we are going to see some better news. The domestic economy is bottoming out, despite many of the headwinds from global sources out there. When I think about New Zealand and our life here in this country, there are still many things to celebrate. But it's also true there are some New Zealanders that are doing it pretty tough. There are always risks to watch out for, but it's important to start from a position of looking at the context. What I see in New Zealand is there are still some positives where many of us have good lives and good opportunities, but some people don't. And for us, it means making sure that we not only look after ourselves, but we think of others, because when we can work together, those risks that we face, those pains that we share, are eased. It's really important we lift our sights for the long term. Economic cycles will come and go, but the long view is very much about how much can we do consistently and regularly over time, because it's those regular habit-making decisions that will set us up for success in the future. From a KiwiSaver perspective, we know that it's for the long term. These short-term uncertainties and volatilities will absolutely happen. What's really important is we also keep a long view while at the same time maintaining curiosity and humility about the current situation. Thanks for joining me today. If you enjoyed it, please share and subscribe if you'd like the next episode of Economy Made Simple. Everything we cover in this session is for general information only. We are not tailoring our comments to your particular financial situation or providing financial advice or recommendations. The information and comments we provide are not intended to convey any guarantees as to the future performance of any investment products, asset classes, or capital markets. Past performance is no guarantee of future performance. Please refer to our full disclosure statement in the description.